benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Ave, Ave, Ave Maria, Ave Maria.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to our June Chartres community call. That was Ruth Cunningham, who's part of our core faculty for the Chartres Academy, who every year for the last number of years has been gracing us with her extraordinary voice and musical abilities. And those of you who've been to Chartres know Ruth and the extraordinary experience of listening to her sing in the cathedral, particularly when we walk the labyrinth. We want to begin our community call as we always do, and that is to turn it over to Apila Colorado, who's one of the founders of the Chartres Academy, who has been leading us ever since, and who invokes the presence of the ancestors and the higher realms on our behalf each year when we attend Chartres. So Apila, I turn it over to you.
Good morning, Jim. Good morning, Chartres community. Great Spirit, Sayyadism, we thank you for this virtual fire that we gather around. Our circle spans the globe. From the birth of humanity, millennia ago, we who have moved about the face of the earth have migrated, have diversified, have multiplied, have separated, developed lines of thought, ways of reason, more analysis, more separation, more division, and exalted our brilliance through the light of the sun to such an extent we find ourselves isolated in our houses, behind masks, separated from each other, no longer able to share the Haloa, your divine breath. In this separation, we have devastated the planet in our exalted, arrogant, intellectual way of being. Now we come to our knees, broken and defeated. Systems of governance, systems of healthcare, systems of education, all of our institutions threatened, even traveling, no longer possible in the way that we have ever known it. In this moment, we stand shattered like broken pottery. This was a creation story for the tribes of Israel. At that moment of the pot shattering, it's the moment of a new beginning. We turn to you, Sayyad, Great Spirit, Creator, Creatress, looking for the word for it is in your word that we can unify with all of life and see the renewal and the beginning of the new cycle. For this possibility, for the renewal of life, with the beginning of the word grammatica, we now turn our hearts and minds. Oh God, Goddess, please, 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 hear our prayers and let this work that we might live again. Onongoyuwanagula uskayadu. Amen.
Thank you, Apila. Very profound words full of gravitas about the moment in which we find ourselves. And I want to just note that, as Apila just reminded us, we're in the pandemic. We are now beginning to pay the Pied Piper of our own intellectual arrogance. And our systems are being shattered. Our world is being stopped. And for the first time ever, the human race has been caught up in the same experience and in the same conversation. So I just want to note that as we begin our community call. And it's important to note that because normally for the last 15 years, we've gathered in June and said we're going to meet in a few weeks in Chartres. And this year, for the first time, we're not going to be there because we can't travel. The pandemic is still alive in almost every country. And most of us are still under some form of lockdown. Things are opening up, but in many places where they're opening up, they're shutting back down because the pandemic bursts out again. So what we wanted to do today is acknowledging that we are embarking on our summer courses in a few weeks, but we're doing it all virtually. And we thought we would do them essentially on the same dates that would have taken place if we were to be meeting live. So Grammatica is going to take place between the 5th and the 11th of July. And we will try to replicate it insofar as we can. So those of you who've been to Chartres on the Sunday, Apila, like she did today, begins the sessions with an invocation. And then I do a recitation of our lineage and our story in being in Chartres. And then we introduce the faculty. And then we have our opening circle, our opening ceremony. Well, we're going to try to replicate that in a virtual kind of way. And then on the Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, we will be listening to different speakers that would have been there in Chartres. We'll be hearing from Sheva Carr and Robert Browning from Heart Ambassadors on how we attain heart coherence. We'll be listening to dialogues with Thomas Hubel and Gabor Mate on trauma and transformation. If you look at the syllabus, you know, we say that if Grammatica is about the Word, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And without the Word, the Logos, nothing was made that was made. That's how the Gospel of John opens. In the beginning was the Word. And Grammatica is the first of the liberal arts. We're starting our third cycle together. What are the words that characterize our reality? It's trauma. Everybody is now traumatized by COVID-19. And how we use this crisis as an opportunity for transformation, the other important word, is key to whether the human race survives intact through the cascade of crises and traumas that will now ensue because we haven't solved climate change and a range of other global crises. So the words of trauma and transformation are the words that we're going to grapple with in Grammatica. And we're going to hear from Andrew Harvey. We're going to have Banafsheh will be with us. We'll have collages of past opening ceremonies and experiences in the labyrinth and the crypt. Our celebrations on the Friday night, our closure on the Saturday, we'll be sharing. Those of you who'll be attending will be greeting each other every day. We'll be highly interactive. And we're moving into new territory. But Grammatica will be full of gravitas. And at the heart of the heart for Grammatica is how we develop heart coherence. Because I'm telling you, my friends, it's coming down. And unless we're fully embodied and fully attuned to our heart, we're not going to develop the personal resilience that we need to navigate through not only the pandemic, but the cascade of crises that is surely coming. Because it's in the midst of all that we somehow have to turn this all around within a diminishing time frame. That's our world. And so Grammatica will be a serious endeavor. It'll be heartful, and it will be empowering. Because we're going to practice heart coherence every single day. That's what connects trauma and turns trauma into transformation, is our capacity to feel the oneness of all being with our heart. So that will be Grammatica between the 5th and the 11th of July. And then we're going to have the first of our pilgrimages. And we're not going to go to the Dordogne as Apila and I had been planning. We won't be doing the pilgrimage after Madonna rising to the sites associated with Mary Magdalene. But thankfully, we have Kayleen Asbo, who does virtual pilgrimages and has been to France as many times as Pila and I have, and many of you, because of her love for that land, and has been leading pilgrimages. So I'd like to now bring Kayleen back by, popular demand. She was so extraordinary last month, Kayleen. I really want to thank you for your enthusiasm, your erudite command of the material, history, literature, philosophy, theology. So I'll now turn it over to Kayleen that will describe the virtual pilgrimages that we're going to be convening. Kayleen?
Thank you so much, Jim. And thank you I'm so thrilled to be joining the faculty of Ubiquity. The image that you see behind me is a place that has been a site of pilgrimage for 1,000 years. Some of you have no doubt been there. It's Rocamadour. And in times of collapse, in times of chaos, and in times of transformation, both personal and collective, this has been a place that people have gone to who have walked it sometimes barefoot, sometimes crawled on their knees. And here inside the chapel, they have taken a posture of complete surrender and supplication, asking for guidance. So today, actually, what I want to talk about in relationship to this very moment that we're living in this world, this moment of collective trauma and also collective transformation, is that the tradition of pilgrimage and the tradition of the so-called Black Madonnas, or the dark feminine, has been associated time and time and time again with the great tradition of alchemy, of taking things that are falling apart, that are collapsing, that are just filled with horror and fear and terror and a sense of apocalypse, and yet finding a way through the alchemical principle of containment and incubation and just the right ingredients of inward reflection to then re-emerge transformed. So it is my hope, my deep hope, that this is the moment that we might all be called to in our world. A moment not simply of complete collapse, but a moment of collective transformation that leads to union. So I'm going to be sharing some images associated with this journey in pilgrimage throughout France that are going to speak to this very idea. Because I think what we are going to be called to when we go on pilgrimage, whether it's an actual pilgrimage, walking in the footsteps of Mary Magdalene, or dancing on the labyrinth, or going on a journey like this in the Dordogne, or whether it's a virtual pilgrimage, like hopefully you will join me and the faculty of Ubiquity for this summer, is that there are these two parts. There's the part that is connecting to a larger timeline, to walk in the footsteps of the ancestors, of those who have gone before, to follow those sacred steps, those time-worn pathways that still vibrate and echo with spiritual power and transformative potential. But it's also the deep, deep, deep journey inside, the journey to our inner transformation. And this is so much a key part of what we're looking at in our world right now. So I'm going to share with you some of these images. And one of the things about this alchemical journey, one of the things about this idea of pilgrimage as transformation, is that in the journeys that we're going to be highlighting this summer through Ubiquity, that I would say that they are really calling us to a place of fierce compassion. That those two things sometimes feel like they're opposites in our world. We have lots of images of anger, and then we have images of the brokenhearted. But what is it to hold them both together? What is it both to hold sun and moon, dark and light, fierceness and intensity, and also softness and tenderness? And the pilgrimages that we'll be doing this summer are really walking in the footsteps of the stories, of the people, of the myths, and of the practices that can awaken that within us and hopefully allow us to shine light into the world. So here is an image that is of this dark sun, the dark sun that is the beginning of the alchemical journey. And in the tradition of alchemy, this call into these places, we might call it to awaken out of unconsciousness, is such an important part. Many of you might be familiar with this particular image from Aurora Consurgens. There's actually a story that Thomas Aquinas might have been the author of this, that after his life of erudition and scholasticism, he had this epiphany, this moment that struck him dumb and silent. And out of that, all that he wanted to do was for the rest of his days to sing the Song of Songs, the great erotic love song of the wisdom tradition of the Hebrews that begins, "I am black, but I am beautiful." And what we see in this image, if you notice, it's this figure sometimes called the Black Angel with these green wings surrounded by golden light. And she's opening up, she's opening herself up. And in the image, what we have is a caduceus, that symbol of healing and transformation. It's also the Vesica Pisces. That's the symbol of the reconciliation of the opposites. And this image of somehow connecting with the dark feminine that leads us into healing and transformation is an enormous part of the medieval tradition of pilgrimage that really began to explode in the world right around the year 1000. And it was at this time that different pilgrim pathways were united. What you see on your screen right now is the 4 pathways in France. One that starts in Vézelay, the Basilica of Mary Magdalene. Another one, Le Puy-en-Velay, with a very important Black Madonna there. Another in the south in Arles, and then up in Paris. And these 4 pathways unite together in the Pyrenees Mountains. And they join these 4 pathways that were at one point called the Chemin de Marie, or the Path of Mary. And in one case called the Path of the Rose. And they join together in the Pyrenees Mountains. And they go all the way to the end of Santiago Compostela. And it became then this deep tradition that when people were at a moment of transformation, when kings were about to assume their thrones, when someone had done something that they needed to atone for, that they were carrying the weight of grief for a murder or a violation of some kind, at the death of a parent, at some significant turning point in life, it became the deep and profound tradition then to join with pilgrims from different places, different areas, and walk this pathway that would lead to hopefully wisdom and enlightenment and well-being for the world. And you find these symbols of the pilgrim path, these scallop shells then. This is the one that's right outside of Chartres that tells you how many kilometers it is if you walk all the way to Compostela. And this is a medieval manuscript that's collected in a book that was sort of the Rick Steves guide in the Middle Ages that included stories and legends and music and lore that would take you then all the way from those French gateways to the end. And when you arrive at the end, as some of you no doubt have been arriving there over the course of your life, this is one of the things that you see. It's the image of a Black Madonna seated on the throne of wisdom. It's actually a copy of one that's in Montserrat in a Benedictine abbey. And throughout this pathway, all throughout France and Spain then, dotted throughout, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these images. Now, one of the things that's so fascinating is the greatest concentration of all of these images were in the lands that we would have called in the Middle Ages Aquitaine, as in Eleanor of Aquitaine. And it was right around the time that she was coming of age, that her troubadour grandfather was coming back from the Crusades, that these images really took and started to flourish. And they were placed in these sacred sites, some of them actually guarded by the Knights Templar in these tiny little villages, these perched villages in these gorgeous chapels. And then you find these exquisite images seated on the throne of wisdom, these dark Madonnas that call us into something that is so profound and transformative. In Jungian traditions, it's actually become a practice at different times of the training to sit with the Black Madonna of Einsiedeln in Switzerland, to see what the wisdom is that arises from within. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that these Madonnas proliferated in the regions where the Aquitanian or Aquitaine culture flourished. Because during the time of the Crusades, the Aquitaine was simultaneously co-arising during this time of religious persecution and war and enmity. At the very same time that was happening, there was a new flowering. And it was a flowering of love poetry and the kind of language of devotion to the divine and an exaltation of the feminine and the courts of courtly love, and actually the introduction of the literal rose into the culture of Europe. And it seems like there were 2 pathways, this juncture, a pathway that led to war and violence, persecution, and a pathway that led to the opening of the heart through beauty, through art, through music, through the flowering of culture. And it's this part that we're going to be tracing. We're going to actually be tracing throughout some of the journeys the story of a family lineage, because part of what is called for in our world is to reclaim the stories that need rewriting and to heal our ancestral wounds. And we're going to talk about that importance, that shift, and how that plays out here at Chartres Cathedral with the window that was commissioned by Blanche of Castile, this amazing rose window that has in its heart a dark Madonna that echoes with the story of her childhood. And then we're going to follow these threads. This was the original Rose Parade, was not something for football in California. It was actually these parades of these dark Madonnas that were throughout Europe. And they created these amazing palanquins that you would carry them bedecked by roses throughout the cities with songs of devotion. And so we'll explore this tradition. This is one that comes, and you see the people coming and bringing their cherished image of this figure of dark wisdom, the Black Madonna associated with the Song of Solomon, that greatest wisdom, erotic love song text that is the mystical gateway that people have passed through the centuries for their own inner transformation. So these rose parades of these dark feminine images of people singing in devotion with these flowers, we're going to encounter the stories and what they might tell us. Because for over 1,000 years, when people were searching for a way through, a new way when all seemed lost, they would come here. They would come to one of these dark Madonnas. They would kneel, they would open their hearts. And notice as you look at them, how very different they feel. They are these images of strength, of empowerment. But one of the things that's so often associated with them, and that was collected together in the songs that were sung on these pilgrim pathways, where I'm going to introduce you to the most marvelous collection called the Cantigas de Santa Maria, that are a collection of over 400 songs of devotion used by pilgrims as they walked these pathways. And in one of them, the story goes that the Madonna appeared at a place where there was a warring group of, on the one hand, the Muslims, and on the other hand, the Christians, and they met at a river. And the Madonna appeared before them with her cloak of compassion spread wide and said, "Why? Why are you fighting? You are both my children." So we're going to talk about the Black Madonna as this reconciling figure, that if we take her as Mary, the mother of Jesus, she was a Jewish woman who gave birth to the figure who created Christianity, who simultaneously is the most revered figure in all of Islam. And we're going to see that these songs of devotion point to new possibilities of cultural transformation and individual awakening. And notice the eyes wide open here that are looking at the world in truth. The eyes sometimes closed to come into the inner awakening, and the eyes sometimes wide open. Many of these images are from southern France, where they are known as Our Lady of Good Death. That there was something here, Notre Dame de Bonne Mort, about going on pilgrimage to encounter this, to encounter one's own mortality and the fears of death that surrounded the world, that somehow would awaken the strength to take the next step. So we're going to talk about those. But notice just what arises in you as you look at these images that are very different from a kind of image of passivity. They call us to be wide awake. And in the midst of death, many of these songs of devotion awaken also the acknowledgement that all of us will die. And yet here, with the skeletons crossed here at Rocamadour, the question is, can we find the courage to truly live life before that? Can we embrace our one wild and precious life in humanity? So these figures of the Black Madonna, over and over and over through the centuries, have done something, have catalyzed something in the alchemy within human beings and within cultures that have awakened new possibilities. This has often been called Our Lady of Liberation. And boy, doesn't our world desperately cry and yearn for liberation right now? The liberation of so many people who are enchained. This one, they tried to chain it. They actually tried to move the statue, and they bound it up with trains, and you can actually see where the chains were broken. So that this idea of liberation, how she has been the person, the figure, the archetypal image that's called us to awaken to that deep question: what do we need to liberate within ourselves? What in our world is in need of liberation? So we'll be following these pilgrim paths here again as Rocamadour. We're going to be following these in the footsteps of reconciling these seeming opposites. Fierceness, the fierceness of a warrior energy, but in service of compassion and universality. And that will take us throughout the course of the summer from Chartres Cathedral, where we will encounter dark Madonnas there, this Our Lady under the earth. She's in this crypt where there are no dead bodies, but she awakens within us something from the underworld. One of the stories of the Black Madonnas is that during the French Revolution, so many of them were hacked and burned and destroyed, but hundreds were hidden. They were hidden in the woods and in the forests. And centuries later, there are these stories of horses or even truffle hunting pigs who would stop and begin to paw the ground. And the farmers would stop and they would dig and they would uncover from the darkness of the earth, they would uncover some of these amazing images. There's a connection between the earth and ecology, what is hidden that needs to be revealed, and these figures and what they call us to awaken to. And so often they are connected with the symbol of the rose. If we think of that symbol of the rose, it is in fact a rose that is an image that has thorns, not unlike the coronavirus. And yet from that seed pattern blossoms and opens such sweetness, such fragrance. And this pathway of the rose that we're going to see is connected to so much of that. So we'll talk about different Black Madonnas and how throughout time some of them have been whitewashed, some of them have been painted, some of them have been changed, and yet they both hold this energy of the all-inclusive feminine that says, you are all my children. You are all my children. And in this journey that connects to the wisdom of Persephone from the Greek traditions, to Isis and the Egyptian mysteries, there's always a connection between confronting our mortality and giving birth to the wisdom that is our seed inside of us to open and flower in fulfillment. So in the journey of the Rose Mystica, I'm going to be talking in particular about one dark Madonna and one family story and how it echoes. And that's the St. Anne window, also known as the North Rose window. And in the very center of this image is the Black Madonna of the celestial realms. I think that there were 3 Black Madonnas, one under the earth, Notre Dame, Our Lady there, under the earth, and then Notre Dame de Piliers on the earthly ground, and then up in the sky there's this Black Madonna of the St. Anne window that's connected to my own ancestral lineage that is both light and dark, that needs healing and hope. This image that was placed by Blanche of Castile in memory of the dark Madonnas that she had seen on her path, on her pilgrim path from Spain to France, to Chartres, hidden on the horse behind her grandmother, Eleanor of Aquitaine. So we're going to encounter those images and draw on the wisdom of the grandmothers, of our grandmothers and of the grandmothers across time, the grandmothers of the centuries. So we'll be talking about how Blanche of Castile was both a troubadour, a singer, a songwriter, a poet, someone who people painted her love poems to her on their castles, but she was also a warrior. In the first pilgrimage that we'll be doing on July 12th through 18th, we'll go deep into the caves. Imagine 22,000 years ago, people crawling on their bellies, carrying the light into these caves to inscribe on the walls images of relatedness and connection to the earth and the animals. And the Black Madonnas, the troubadours, the love songs that echo across the centuries, and ending with the Black Madonna of our time, Josephine Baker, who reconciles the fierceness of a woman who was decorated by Charles de Gaulle for her heroism fighting Nazism, and who embodies universal compassion in the Dordogne region with her own castle that welcomed all children of all races and religions. And then later in the summer, I will invite you to come with me in the footsteps of Mary Magdalene, where we'll reclaim the lost and buried stories of the Christian contemplative tradition, a journey that stretches from Mary Magdalene's arrival on the shores of France, where there are also stories of Black Madonnas there, to this cave of the heart that was the place of reconciliation between Eastern Christianity and Western Christianity, and was the emergence of the idea, the very idea of awakening the eye and ear of the heart. It was here in this cave above the forest of Artemis that John Cassian penned his great mystical writings that were all about learning the prayer of the heart. And I'm going to invite you on this journey to write the own prayers of your hearts as we encounter figures like St. Patrick, who studied to become a monk here on Lerins Abbey off the coast of France, and encounter extraordinary places like a French Orthodox monastery that carries this wisdom tradition of the sacred feminine with the relics of Mary Magdalene. We're going to invite you as an incentive to join either of these pilgrimages, that if you would like to come in the footsteps of the sacred feminine or walk in the footsteps of Mary Magdalene with me in a journey that's both an outer journey of story and image and song, but also an inner journey that hopefully will open up your own heart, that if you're able to join before July 1st, if you're able to sign up with this call, you'll also receive a 22-day online course that appears in your email box every day. That is the stories of the sacred feminine and Mary Magdalene, with links to images and music that will be included. We'll also be reclaiming some of the things that have been lost and buried. Coming up July 21st and August 11th, I'm thrilled to be offering a great books course here, where we're going to be talking about a story, a lost gospel, a gospel that was brought from Alexandria to southern France by Mary Magdalene, and just recovered and translated in our own time into English. So I'll be leading a discussion section on the gospel of the beloved companion. This image by my dear friend Sue Ellen Parkinson, she's an amazing artist, and it actually ties in so beautifully to the central teaching of this flowering of the human soul. In this image that you see, there is the tree that has 8 boughs, and unfolding on each one is the awakening of the fruit of wisdom and compassion and strength and courage and light and grace. Those are all part of the teaching of this amazing text. And this is a free great book seminar that we'll be sharing. And that theme of taking the wisdom that you see in this deep wisdom of the past, and carrying it forward as a seed pattern of awakening and flowering. That is the hope of all of these programs through Ubiquity. A remembering of what has been lost. To take what has been hidden and bring it to light. To take what has been lost and to reclaim it. To take what has been burnt in the ashes and to find it rising again like a phoenix, and folded all within a cloak of compassion in the service of humanity for our own inner awakening and for the well-being of the world. So it's my hope that you might be called to join on one of these journeys, these stories that have such amazing power within them to bring us to hope, that during this time of alchemical transformation and collapse, to find those seeds, the seeds of inner awakening and the seeds of beauty that have been left by our ancestors, to plant them anew, to bring to life a new garden. May it be so.
Thank you so much, Kayleen. Thank you. So inspiring. Hello, everyone. I'm Banafsheh, and I'm so happy that Kayleen will also be joining us in Madonna Rising. You know, the next best thing to being in Chartres during the week devoted to the Feast of the Assumption of Mary is to join us virtually as we celebrate the rising of the feminine through lecture by great scholars and thinkers and minds and hearts like Anne Baring, Andrew Harvey, and Kayleen Asbo, and as well as journeying through song. Ruth Cunningham will be opening our sessions every day, like she did today, with a song and music that she will also invite us to follow along with her, although we will be muted and we will just listen to her beautiful voice. We will also dance and do embodiment practices so that we can actually be the teachings that we're exploring. You know, the divine feminine says to us, beckons us, especially in these days, to see me, she says, hear me, and be me. And in being me, bring the compassion, bring the love, bring the tenderness, and bring the knowing that all of life is sacred, that the earth is sacred, that our communion with each other is sacred. Bring that through your being, these ideas that we will be exploring. We will be joined by Peggy Rubin, the great Peggy Rubin, who is also on the panel with us today, to not only dance and embody and sing, but also to, through sacred theater, put some of these ideas that we will be exploring into motion, and together through the practice of theater, open the meaning. And what will we be exploring? We will be exploring the assumption, the meaning of the assumption. This rising of bringing matter into union with spirit and exploring that in ourselves. What does that mean for us? What is the relationship of the body and soul? What is the relationship between earth and heaven? Why is it that we hold one superior to the other? Why do we hold spirit as superior to matter, heaven superior to earth? The invitation through our time and focusing on the assumption is to bring matter into union with spirit. We will be exploring also what Kayleen was just talking about through the Gospel of the Beloved Companion. I'm going to invite us to journey into the 8 boughs that Kayleen referred to, this tree, this vision of the tree that is the human body reaching to heaven and embodying both the earth in our roots and the light in our crown. We will be exploring that teaching that Mary Magdalene gives us, the tree with the 8 boughs. You can visit, you can go onto the page. I'm going to put that in the link here. This is different. You can look at the schedule that we will be doing every day in our Madonna Rising Intensive. One very important component, of course, of our week is going to be exploring the rose, Rosa Mystica. And what is the symbol of the rose, the sacred symbol of the rose, through different traditions, looking at the rose windows of Chartres and the labyrinth that is also the shape of a rose. We will be exploring these concepts, but also Anne Baring, the great Anne Baring, is going to take us into looking at the rose through different traditions, from all the way from the goddess traditions through the different renditions, representations of the rose. So I'm going to ask Anne right now if she will share with us some of what we will journey with her in our time in Madonna Rising. Anne?
Okay, I think that's all right now. First of all, I'd like to thank Kayleen, who I think is the closest to a troubadour that we could possibly find in this day and age, bringing the songs of the South to us in our different homes and suffering from this dreadful virus, which is truly a nigredo in the alchemical sense. It is the going into the underworld and going through a dismemberment. So I'm going to call my talk in August The Sacred Way of the Rose, and this is just a brief introduction. The rose is the greatest mystical symbol of the West, just as the lotus is of the East. The rose symbolizes both the divine feminine and the way of the heart. Its exquisite beauty, its fragrance, the soft velvety feel and symmetrical disposition of its many petals made it a symbol of perfection, not only earthly perfection, but heavenly perfection. The sacred way of the rose was the path of the heart, awakened to the presence of the divine feminine. At some time, probably in the Middle Ages, the rose became a symbol of the anima mundi, the soul of the world, and was immortalized as the great white rose at the end of Dante's great vision of paradise. The rose windows of Chartres could be seen as the anima mundi, holding at their hearts the image of Christ and the Virgin Mary. Drawing on ancient mystery traditions, the rose was a central symbol in both European and Islamic alchemy, a symbol, I believe, of the opening of the heart to the revelation and experience of divine love. The exquisite form and color of the rose made it the supreme image of love and beauty, and obviously in many cultures it was associated with the beauty of woman. No young man of the Middle Ages and early Renaissance would have dreamed of courting his beloved without presenting her with a rose, the supreme symbol of his love. The rose inspired this exquisite poem by Abelard, whose forbidden love for Eloise, his brilliant pupil, came to a tragic end. Take thou this rose, O rose, since thine own flower it is, and by that rose thy lover captive is. I suffer, yea, I die, but this mine agony I count all bliss, since death is life again upon thy lips. Homer wrote of the rosy-fingered dawn, but the image of the rose goes far back beyond his time, back to the temple and palace gardens of Egypt, Crete, Sumer, and Babylon. The two griffins in the throne room of the Palace of Knossos have stylized roses placed at their heart, and roses adorn the frescoed walls of Mycenaean palaces. A rose is at the center of the Cretan Phaistos disc, whose meaning is still undeciphered, and roses were painted on early terracotta vases and attached to gold necklaces that now rest in museums. They are found on an exquisite diadem and funeral casket in the tomb of Philip of Macedon in northern Greece. Astronomers and mathematicians, perhaps even Pythagoras, noted the geometric connection between the orbit of Venus and the distribution of the petals of the rose, with its hidden golden center. Wherever the rose grew in the ancient world, it was associated with the goddess. Roses adorned her statues, decorated her shrines, were strewn on the processional way of the great ceremonies that celebrated the return of the earth's fertility in spring. This would have been particularly true of the Egyptian goddess Isis, who was worshipped throughout the Mediterranean area for 3,000 years, and in France until AD 600, when her worship was transferred to the Virgin Mary. We know that roses were associated with the goddess Isis in Hellenistic times through a dream that a man called Lucius Apuleius, an initiate of the mysteries of Isis, recounts in the Golden Ass. He tells the story of his transformation into the form of an ass, and how, after much suffering and search, the goddess Isis came to him in a dream and told him to attend a public ceremony held in her honor, where she would tell the high priest in a dream to carry a garland of roses in her procession. She instructed Apuleius in his ass form to push through to the front of the crowd, come up to the high priest as if he wished to kiss his hand, then pluck the roses from his wreath into his mouth and eat them. He would then be transformed from an ass back into his human form. Apuleius found himself watching the procession until he saw the high priest approaching, holding up the promised garland. Gently, he wriggled his way through the crowd to the front until he came level with the astonished high priest. My heart trembled, said Apuleius, and my heart pounded as I ate those roses with loving relish. And no sooner had I swallowed them than I found that the promise had been no deceit. To his amazement and joy, as well as the astonishment of the high priest and the crowd, he found himself miraculously transformed back into his human form, covering his private parts in embarrassment until a cloak was thrown over him. In Greece, we know that the rose was sacred to Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, and that her priestesses wore wreaths of white roses in their hair, and that these same white roses were strewn over the approach to her temple. And when in Roman times Aphrodite was transformed into Venus, roses were still sacred to her and would have embellished her shrines. We also know that in Rome, the statues of the goddess Cybele were adorned with roses, and that once a year her effigy as the Great Mother was covered with roses and carried through the streets. It may be at this time, when her mysteries were celebrated in Rome, as Jules and I wrote in the Myth of the Goddess, that the rose began to evolve as an image of resurrection, and the rose garden as the hidden dimension of the goddess. In Christian times, the sacredness of the rose was transferred to the Virgin Mary, and the rose garden and the rosary began to assume mystic significance, always connected with her and with the heart. Even to this day, in Spain, Italy, and Sicily, roses are strewn over her statue and cover her heavy chariots as they process through the streets of towns that still, without being aware of what they are doing, celebrate the ancient ceremonies of the goddess. If we look to the Middle East and to the ancient ceremony of the sacred marriage, we find the rose enshrined as the rose of Sharon in the Song of Songs. And if we go further east to Persia, whose exquisite gardens were a symbol of paradise, we can listen to Rumi, who wrote many beautiful verses about the rose, among them this one. Love is the infinite rose garden, eternal life the least of its blooms. For lovers of the rose like Rumi, this flower was and is an epiphany of the divinity at the heart of life. In 17th century Europe, the rose became the primary symbol of the Rosicrucians, following the extraordinary visionary experience of Christian Rosenkreuz and his book, The Chemical Wedding, written 100 years earlier. The rose is also the symbol of the invisible assembly of men and women, the fellowship of the rose, who century after century dedicated their lives to serving the world and helping humanity rise to a higher level of consciousness. The rose is the primary symbol of the divine feminine that has vanished from our world and is one of the oldest symbols of the wisdom tradition and of divine wisdom herself, the Holy Spirit, radiating love and light to our world from the divine ground. Like the thousand-petaled lotus of the Eastern traditions, the rose came to symbolize the union of the awakened soul with the divine ground, or the experience of cosmic consciousness. It was Mary Magdalene who brought the wisdom tradition to France, and Veronica Goodchild told me about the Order of the Blue Rose that she established in France during her 20 years of living there. Blue is the color that has always been associated with divine wisdom and is the predominant color of the windows of Chartres. We do not know who guarded and transmitted this hidden tradition for 1,000 years until it came alive in the 12th century in the quest for the Holy Grail and the building of the sublime Gothic cathedrals of France. But I'm sure that Eleanor of Aquitaine had something to do with this. So we need to recover this tradition today in a world that is bereft of wisdom and sorely in need of a deeper understanding of reality. The sacred way of the rose is the way of the heart, the way of the visionaries who from time immemorial nurtured this ancient tradition which connected us to the deeper levels of reality and opened our soul to awareness of our own divinity and immortality. I believe the great rose windows of Chartres offer the blazing cosmic vision of the awakened soul and its union with the divine ground. So I will end with the words of Betty Kovacs from her book, Merchants of Light, words which celebrate the sacred way of the rose, the way of love that I think all of us on this call are treading. Without the feminine power of the heart to birth a feeling world, we cannot bring justice into being. Without the integration of all that the feminine symbolizes and the inward journey to develop soul, creation cannot continue to unfold. And without a deep respect for the laws of nature, inner and outer development is thwarted. The consequence is a spiritual and material wasteland. The message is clear. Without the creative energy of love, we cannot create a true civilization. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you. As usual, your words of wisdom are so inspiring. I'm going to ask, we're at the end of our call, but I would like to ask Peggy Rubin to say a few words as well, and what she will be guiding us into during our intensive Madonna Rising in August. Peggy?
Thank you, Banafsheh, and thank you, Kayleen, and thank you, Jim, and thank you, Apila, and thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Anne, for the beauty and wisdom and glory and power and wonder and astonishment that you have brought into my house, into my home. It's a wonderful thing to be gathered in Chartres at the cathedral, but this is the opportunity, and it's a precious one that I greet with enormous reverence and gratitude, of bringing the cathedral into our hearts, in bringing that pilgrimage path into our hearts, in bringing that enormous learning and wisdom and glory into our hearts, and to bring alive again, together again, the whole sense of the divine feminine and the human being in this passionate, loving, wild embrace. I want to just put one thought on a beautiful question that a participant has asked, is why do we call her the Black Madonna? We don't call the Madonna the White Madonna or the Pink Madonna. And I think that in this time, this alchemical time, I vote for the Great Mother of Wisdom as a title for those, and also in South America, it's the ones who've disappeared, the disappeared ones. So she honors, she holds, she carries, she blesses, in the form of dark matter and dark energy, one of which holds the worlds together, and one of which pushes them apart faster and faster again. So that whole sense of the unknown, the mystery that she encompasses. So the great one of wisdom is what I nominate, we call her, however you feel like that. But anyway, it's a wonder to be with you. It's going to be glorious to have you in my very own house, and let the house become a sacred center for the divine feminine, the divine masculine, and the great rose, and music and song and dance and movement and all that. Thank you. Blessings on all of you, all of you, all of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Kayleen. Thank you, Ruth, Banafsheh, Apila. This has been a very profoundly moving session for me, particularly Anne, your exposition on the rose. Today is June 14th, and it was my mother's birthday. And had she been alive, this would have been her 100th birthday. And she loved roses. So to me, there was a very deep synchronicity about the Rosa Mystica lineup for today on my mother's 100th birthday. I didn't really realize it until late last night, as I was reflecting on what I was kind of carrying in my heart. My mother's been in my thoughts very persistently over the last matter of days. I've been carrying a lot of sadness and a lot of grief for various reasons having to do with the pandemic and humanity's state of affairs. And then I wanted to just close by reading a very short poem that my son, Zach, wrote right around my mother's death in 2014. He said, "Grammy is a rose. Grammy reminds me of a rose strengthening on love and growing with good thoughts. She lived as a bud, but now she has blossomed in the garden of paradise. She is now a rose that will never fade." Many years ago, when I was in college, I visited the Ukraine. And we went to an old castle. And around the castle was a very ancient cemetery. And the guide took us to one particular gravestone of a 16-year-old girl that had died sometime in the 17th century. And the epitaph on her gravestone simply said, her life was like a moment of a rose. And that notion, that image that a life can be like a moment of a rose. This is a rose. Can our lives now be like moments of a rose, given everything that we're going through? Can we love each other like my mother loved, completely selflessly and ceaselessly? We honor the Black Madonna, but in the end, it's other human beings that shape our lives equally profoundly. My mother's life, the life of every mother, a moment of a rose. That's what we need on planet Earth right now. And so I want to, before turning it over to Ruth for a final musical benediction, I just want to honor my mother, honor all the women that have been represented on this call today, honor what the challenges are that lie ahead, and hope that as we traverse our summer courses, Grammatica, Madonna Rising, the two pilgrimages, that you will find that experience to be empowering and transformational and enriching of your soul. Because if I know one thing, is the cascade of crises are going to now intensify. And we have to be able to create islands of coherence in our own hearts, in our own communities, in our own families, in our own organizations, commensurate with the chaos. And that, to me, ultimately is the power of the rose. It's the coherence, the beauty in the sea of chaos. Thank you, everyone. Now, Ruth, why don't you take us out with a song?
Kayleen, I found the words. Radiant star on the mountain, like a miraculous sunbeam. Hear the divided people. Stella splendens in monde ut solis radium. Miraculis serrato ex audi populum.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, everyone. We will meet again in September on our community calls. And between now and then, enjoy virtual Grammatica, the pilgrimages, and virtual Madonna Rising. Be well. See you soon.